We continue this year in Navi, Jewish history. Last year, you recall we had a story which we closed on very quickly. We cut it very short. And instead of continuing further now, review that story and fill in the part that was omitted. And then from there go on further. Short piece, but a very important one. Extremely vital information. So we spoke about Sheva ben Bichri, who rebelled against David HaMelech, against King David, and he tried to get the Jews to follow him. Instead, King David sent his armies out against Sheva ben Bichri, especially Yoav. Yoav was the commander-in-chief of King David's armies. Yoav was the greatest general, perhaps, of all time. The most powerful, the most potent in battle. And he pursued Sheva ben Bichri to the city of Arizal. There, he was trapped. This was a walled city. He went into the city. The people there apparently protected Sheva ben Bichri. Yoav came to the city. He began to attack the wall of the city. Attack means that he would crash through the wall and kill every person in that city, thereby being certain that he would have killed Sheva ben Bichri. The fate of that city seemed doomed. Every Jew in that city would appear would be doomed to die. There was one woman, a chachama, a very wise woman in that city, who approached Yoav from the top of the wall. She spoke to him, and Yoav listened very intently. Could you picture a commander-in-chief, a powerful general, who fears no man, who fears no army, who the Torah says could take on an entire army of Philistines single-handedly and defeat them? Here comes the woman, and Yoav stops the battle to listen to the words of this woman. What kind of power does this woman have? Isha Chachama, a wise woman. The Gemara says this was no ordinary woman. This woman was a very, very old woman, extremely aged. She was the daughter of one of Yaakov Avinu's sons, Yaakov Avinu's granddaughter. Imagine how old she was now. In fact, she lived longer than any other woman in history. Her name was Serach Bas Asher. She said to Yoav, let me speak to you, because what I have to say is important. And I have a knowledge, a wisdom that is necessary to solve this problem. Just as I played an important role in past history. She was famous for a number of items. For one thing, she was the one who notified Yaakov Avinu that his son Yosef HaTzadik was still alive. One important act of shlichus, carrying such tidings. Secondly, she was the one who notified Moshe Rabbeinu where the coffin of Yosef HaTzadik was. The Jews had to leave Egypt, and they were sworn to take the coffin of Yosef HaTzadik to Eretz to bury him there. But they had been slaves for 210 years. No one in that generation knew where the coffin was buried. And so there was only one alive from the previous time who knew where they had secreted the coffin of Yosef HaTzadik. This was Serach Bas Asher. Told Moshe Rabbeinu about this. He acquired the coffin, and he carried it with him that night when they left. Next morning, he left Egypt onto the desert. During the entire 40 years, he guarded the coffin himself. And then finally, when Yeshua took the Jews into Israel, they carried the coffin and buried it in the city of Shechem. Those who visited the cave of Yosef HaTzadik in the city of Shechem, that's where he was buried. This was the work of Serach Bas Asher, who notified Moshe later the coffin's whereabouts. Now she said to Yoav, I seek peace for the Jews. Wouldn't you like to have the same? Is it fair that for the sake of one man, you want to kill thousands of innocent Jewish men, women, and children? And Yoav stopped short and said, "You're right. Of course not. Chas v'sholom. Why should I spill the blood of any Jew? I ask only one man. I ask for Sheva ben Bichri, the rebel who tried to take away the kingdom from King David. He deserves death. He is the one that I want. If you surrender him, then we will leave you in peace. No one will be harmed." So she said, "Wait here. I will bring him to you." She went to speak to the elders of that city. And the posek says that she brought out the head of Sheva ben Bichri, handed this to Yoav, and he left. That was the end of the battle. She saved the city. That's all the posek says, but the Gemara says it wasn't that simple. It was a very big problem. A big, important meeting had to take place. This Gemara, the Yerushalmi, states that they were confronted with a major problem. Confronted with a question in Hebrew law. Here, they had a demand. It was a demand being made for the people of the city to surrender a Jew. No matter what kind of a Jew he was still a Jew. Surrender a Jew to his death. There is a Mishnah which states that if the enemy orders a city of Jews to surrender one Jew, or the entire city will be wiped out, then the rule is that the entire city must die rather than to save themselves at the cost of the life of one Jew. This is a clearly set law in the Talmud. Now, the second states, though, that if the enemy demands a certain Jew, if they name that person, then it's different. In other words, they say, we don't want a Jew, give us one, you decide which one dies, we're telling you which one we want. Give us that one, otherwise we'll kill all of you. Then, the Mishnah says they may surrender that one, because what do they gain by not releasing him? If they do not surrender that Jew, the one that's being demanded, then the enemy will break inside and they'll kill that Jew plus the rest of the Jews there. And you surrender him, they're not doing any harm to him because he would have died anyhow, and so they are permitted to surrender this Jew. Now, on that Mishnah, there is a debate in the Gemara, Yerushalmi. Two rabbis debate this point. Where do we get this information from, that you may surrender a Jew if his name is submitted? The Gemara says from this story. Because Yoav demanded a certain person, Sheva ben Bichri. Then it was permissible to surrender him because the name was given. However, the question now arises, if the enemy says, no matter who the enemy is, give us this man, and you're all free, is that man to be surrendered if he is actually innocent of any crime? Could you hand over an innocent person to the enemy, or must that person be guilty of a crime which deserves a death penalty? In this case, the case of Sheva ben Bichri, we find that he deserved a death penalty because he had rebelled against the king, revolutionist, for which the penalty is death. Although there's no such law in the Torah, but it was a law of the land, law of the kingdom, Dina de Malchusa. The one who rebels against the king is supposed to get a death penalty. So that too is a law which must be obeyed, and therefore in this case they were permitted to surrender Sheva ben Bichri because he deserved a death penalty anyhow. But what if the person, not Sheva ben Bichri, not a person, would have been demanded with the name given? Could the people in the city surrender that person? The debate is, Rish Lakish says they could not surrender any person unless the person deserved death. And Yochanan says that the person could be surrendered if his name is submitted, though he does not deserve a death penalty, because of the reason given previously. fact that his life could not be spared anyhow, it might as well spare the lives of the rest of the people. So in halacha, we find that the halacha, the Shulchan Aruch, the din states, the din is like the shlokish, that you are allowed to surrender this person only if he deserves a death penalty. That's what the halacha says. The Rambam says that more. Now what is strange about it, that Taz in Yerdea asks this question. The fact is that the Gemara tells us a story afterwards that Yehoshua ben Levi is one of the greatest rabbis at that time. He was so great that the Gemara compares him to, in a sense, to Rabbi Shimon ben Arizal. When he was nostalgic, the first one he met was Rabbi Shimon ben Arizal. And if he could meet Rabbi Shimon ben Arizal in heaven, that shows how great he was. In his time, Shimon Levi had a steady visitor who came to visit him daily. This visitor was Eliyahu HaNavi, who came to study Torah with him each day. It happened that there was a man who was sought for a crime by the king, and this man fled and came to the city of Yehoshua ben Levi. The kingdom sent a message to Yehoshua ben Levi: surrender this man to us, or else. Now, we give you the name of the person, and we ask if you surrender him. Yehoshua ben Levi thought about this. He had to resolve this problem. And he felt, I have the answer. The Mishnah says, if the name is given, the person is deserving of a penalty, you may surrender him. So he went himself to this person and told him, I'm sorry, we cannot shield you. You cannot take refuge in our city. We must surrender you to the king. I regret this very much, but it must be done. This is a law, Hebrew law. And so, this man was handed over to the king's soldiers, and from that day on, Yehoshua ben Levi no longer had Eliyahu HaNavi as a guest. He felt very broken hearted. He began to fast, daven to fast daily. He continued to fast until finally he broke through, and Eliyahu HaNavi came to him to speak to him. And he said, Yehoshua ben Levi asked him, obviously you didn't come because I had done something wrong. Obviously it was my handing over this man to the king. I don't understand. Did I do anything wrong if I obeyed an edict, a statement by the rabbis of the Gemara? This is a clearly written black on white statement in the Mishnah. What did I do wrong there? So he answered, that's not a Mishnah for you to follow. It's not a good Mishnah. It's not a Mishnah as Chassidut. It would be a stranger statement than that. There's no such thing as a good Mishnah and one you follow and you don't follow. And what's bigger, the time of Kasha is, this Mishnah is not advisory because it still means you can hand the Jew over to his death. Now, how is anybody supposed to know which Mishnah is to be followed, which one isn't? How is Yehoshua ben Levi supposed to know that this is not the Mishnah to follow? A person can say his faith in the Torah is so pure, the Mishnah says, Talmud says, do this, we do it, without question. That's what he did. Why be blamed for it? Taz answers that the two answers. First answer is that this person who was being summoned was not guilty of a death penalty. The Yehoshua ben Levi should have realized that the law remains like the shlokish, as the Rambam cusses, that you can surrender him only if he's guilty of a death penalty. He's supposed to get death anyhow. That's one answer. More important, the Taz says, and we all know what the law discourse on that, more important was the fact that Yehoshua ben Levi said, Mishnah Chassidut means to do it in a manner, not that there's anything wrong with the Mishnah, it's the way you carried out the words of the Mishnah that's wrong. The Mishnah says you may surrender this person. Does that mean it's a mitzvah to surrender him? That means you do it eagerly, leap into it? What should be done is, when it comes to doing dirty work like that, you should have shied away from it. It may be done, it has to be done, but let someone else do it. Don't soil your hands with his blood. You wouldn't do it, others would do it. At least you'd have part of your conscience clear. You did not take direct action against the Jew. It is permissible, it is advisable, it has to be done to save the lives of the Jews in the city. But saving the lives of other Jews by taking the life of another Jew, one Jew's life is not better than a second Jew's life. Who says that his blood is any more red than the first one? So, at least though it is permissible, it should have been your prerogative in letting someone else take this action. You did it yourself, and that was the error. That's the Taz's answer. But back to this case, though, this Isha Chachama, Sarah Bas Osher, was the one who resolved this question. Imagine, at that time, how much she knew. All this discussion we have now, she was fully aware of. She was very learned, more so than the elders in her city, and she is the one that resolved this question for them. It is permissible for us, she said, to surrender Sheva ben Bichri because he is a rebel who deserves death anyhow. Since he is as good as dead, why should all these innocent Jews in the city die for his sake? Without even saving his life either. He's going to die anyhow if the all breaks in. This was her assistance where she got the people in the city to agree, and this is what saved the lives of the Jews in the city. Going on to the next chapter. In this next chapter, the Gemara speaks about, at length, the moral of this story, although it will seem like a very remote part, very distantly related to the story itself, that the moral of the story is that if you're looking for a mate, if you're looking for a wife, and the same thing holds true for a husband, then you must marry one who has Jewish blood, meaning one who has Jewish characteristics, one who has a Jewish heart. And this means, the Gemara says, one who is a Rachamon, one who has kindness, pity, compassion, consideration by nature. So nature is that he's kind to others. And secondly, Baishon, which means one who is shy, not one who is loud, boisterous. Third, Golech Hasoda, which means one that will freely help another person, whether with money, with advice, or with physical assistance. If you see a person who has these three qualities, the Gemara says, you know that he is a descendant of Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, who have these three qualities. He's a true Jew, one you can marry. So if you find these qualities in a woman, that's a perfect mate. But in a man, if both have these qualities, that's in perfect mating. And among Jews, these qualities are very prevalent. Now, the story itself, the origin of this statement is a story, one of the last chapters of the life of King David. Torah tells us that in later years, a famine suddenly broke out among the Jews. But what? There was no food growing, no rain, and this hunger and famine took a very heavy toll. This hunger and famine lasted for 3 years. And there's no cure for a thing like this. There's nothing you can do. If there's no rain, you cannot produce food. And it means that people suffer and many die because of this hunger. During the first year of this hunger, David Baruch decided to investigate, find out the reason for this hunger. There's no such thing as a plague, a disease, or a harsh, heavenly decree coming upon the Jews without a reason. There must be a sin that has brought this decision from heaven. So he felt that there must be idol worship among the Jews, because we have in the Kriya Shema where it says that if you will turn away from Hashem to idol worship, Hashem will become angry and he will hold back the rain in the heavens and not lower it to the earth to give you food. So he sent out to investigate if there's any idol worship among the Jews, and he found that there was none. The Jews are perfect in their loyalty, allegiance to Hashem, their faith in Hashem. Second year, the hunger continued. He investigated further, and his question was, there's another posek which says that if there is infidelity, there is adultery, if there is zinus, chas v'shalom, among Jews, this too can bring about a famine. Again, they studied, they observed, questioned, they found that the Jews are pure in this respect. Third year, the famine continued, and he thought there's one more possibility, one more reason that could cause a famine, and that is, the Gemara says, people who pledge, who make pledges to give tzedakah, and do not fulfill that pledge, this can bring about a famine. Hashem holds back the blessings, the rain, the shefa. He found that there was no Jew who had made any pledges and had withheld it. So King David said, I have definitely solved the problem. I know for certain that I must be the guilty one. The Jews are innocent completely. It must be my fault. So he prayed to Hashem. He asked the Una B'Tulim. He questioned the chest plate of the Kohen Gadol, which he contacts heaven. Then he was told, the answer came back from heaven, that there are two reasons for this famine, which will take a very heavy toll of human life unless these two reasons are rectified, unless they are corrected. One, there is a serious anger in heaven over the fact that Shaul HaMelech, King Shaul, passed away and was buried without the proper dignity, without the honor that was fit for a Jewish king. Recall that he was killed in his last battle with the Philistines. The Philistines had mutilated him, and some very courageous fighters among the Jews penetrated through the field, the battlefield, to the Philistine city, and retrieved the body of Shaul HaMelech and his sons, brought back to Israel. But there was no burial with honor, the top honor as is fit for a king of the Jews. Royalty, plus the fact that he was a tzadik. And this brought about an anger in heaven, which brought down the wrath of Hashem upon the Jews. This was only one reason. The other reason, very paradoxically, was an anger against an act by King Shaul when he had approached the city of Nov. The city of Nov was the city of the Kohanim, and he accused them of helping his enemy, King David. When King David came there, they had given King David the sword of Goliath and some bread for his people, and Shaul HaMelech accused them of rebelling against him, going to the side of King David, and so he had all the Kohanim killed. Now, the fact that all the Kohanim were killed did not anger heaven so much, because the Kohanim themselves, friendly to the Kohanim, were mochel, they forgave King Shaul for this act. In that city of Nov, there were also Givonim, Anshe Givon. Givonim were non-Jews who had years back had tricked Yehoshua into making a peace treaty with them when they'd wipe out all the Arab nations in Eretz Yisrael. They would allow the Givonim to remain alive as water carriers, as wood choppers, but remain alive. In this case, when Shaul had killed the city he had the city killed. He didn't put a finger on himself. But he would have been killed, the Kohanim, in the city of Nov. There were 7 Givonim in that city who were killed too. Of course, there's a question again, were they actually killed, or was it that they were supported by the city of Nov, by the Kohanim? There was a Zebah that had been killed. any event, let's say that the 7 Givonim were killed, and now there was an anger in heaven because the Givonim had to be pacified. They felt they resented this act against them, and unless the Givonim were pacified, then the plague would break out among the Jews. This famine would go much further. It would be a great loss of life. So King David called in the Givonim to his palace, and he said to them, there's a problem with the city of Nov. 7 Givonim were killed. Admittedly, I want to offer you anything at all, whatever you wish, to make peace with you. But of course, if we want, we give you nothing. You're still our slaves. But I want you to feel that you've been compensated for your loss. State your price. No matter how much you ask, no matter what ransom you demand, it'll be given to you. He felt that they would ask for thousands, millions, anything he'd pay to get this plague off, to get it removed. These Givonim were very cold, heartless. And they said, we want no money at all. All the gold in Israel cannot pay us for this act. We want 7 lives in exchange. We want 7 children of King Shaul to pay with their lives. They should be killed and hung for this act. King David tried his best to reason with them, to persuade them. What good would this bloodshed do you? We're offering you vast wealth. We're offering you anything you wish. Why take the lives of innocent children? They had no part in this act at all. What kind of revenge is that? The Givonim remained adamant. They refused to budge, and they said, if you want us to be satisfied, you must surrender 7 descendants of King Shaul, have them killed and hung, and then we will release you from any obligation. And so King David was forced to select 7 of King Shaul's descendants. He found 2 sons of King Shaul that still remained alive, and 5 of King Shaul's grandchildren, the 5 daughters of the 5 children of Merav. You recall, Merav was the first daughter of King Shaul that King David was supposed to have married. He did not. He married the second one, Michal. Merav had 5 children, and now King David took these 5 children of Merav, together with the 2 children of King Shaul, a total of 7, and these 7 were handed over to the Givonim to be killed and hung. So the Gemara says this is a difficult task, because you have to select. You've got to select among the descendants of King Shaul 7 people. If he had exactly 7, you haven't got much of a problem. But if there are more than 7, how do you pick out? How do you sentence to death? Among innocent people, which do you select? How do you pick them out? The Gemara says that he could never take it upon himself. So he had them walk past the Aharon Kodesh. And whichever one the sign came from the Aharon, if this one is accepted, it meant he is accepted as a person to die. The 7 that were accepted were, as we said, the 2 sons of King Shaul, the 5 children of Merav. There was one, you recall we mentioned Mephibosheth, Mephibosheth, the son of Yonasan. He was a cripple. One of King David tried his best to benefit him by having him eat in his palace. King David was very anxious to see that Mephibosheth remained alive, so he prayed very hard that the Aharon should not touch, should not accept Mephibosheth. His tefillah helped. And of course, here the question arises, why did King David daven so hard for Mephibosheth and not for the other Mephibosheth, the son of Shaul HaMelech? This was the grandson. Both had the same name. King Shaul had a son named Mephibosheth. We find in the Gemara Brachos that Mephibosheth was the rabbi of King David, his official rabbi. So if he's going to save one, shouldn't he have attempted to use his power of tefillah to save Mephibosheth, the son of Shaul HaMelech, his own Rebbe, rather than Mephibosheth, the son of Yonasan, King Shaul's grandson, who he liked as the son of his close friend? The answer is, the Mephoshim say that, of course, King David did first try to use his tefillah to try to save Mephibosheth's Rebbe. The tefillah did not help because the Aharon pulled this one in, and then he tried, at least for the next one, Mephibosheth of Yonasan, and there it did help. But he did try for his own Rebbe first. He was not successful, and he finally achieved the answer, replied to his tefillah with the second, the grandson. At least 7 members of King Shaul's family were taken. 7 innocent people were put to death, and then they were hung. And they were hung and left to hang for approximately 7 months. They were put to death in Nisan, and they were removed at the end of Tishrei. A total of 7 months' time, these dead bodies hung. The mother of the 2 children guarded these bodies during the entire time against vultures and other items that might destroy the bodies. And now the Gemara says, we have some very perplexing questions to ask. First place, what's most curious about one item, the fact that there's a posek in the Torah that says, Ish bechetei yumos, a man shall die for his sin, not for somebody else's sin. Children should not die for the sins of the fathers, nor fathers for the sins of the children, and they will die only for his sin alone. By what right, how could we have allowed this mitzvah, this din, this law of the Torah to be broken because of these vicious givonim? Why kill innocent children for an act? We wouldn't even call it a sin. An act by someone else, an act by King Shaul. The Gemara answers that in order to be the Kaddish Hashem, Kaddish Shem Hashem, in order that there should be no complaint by Goyim, that Goyim should not say that the Jews are cruel to converts. For generations later, the Goyim would say, look what the Jews did to the Givonim in that city. They converted, they joined the Jews, and this is how they treat them. They kill them. They kill innocent converts. They make a pogrom. Notice, the one time when there might be a suspicion of a pogrom, it wasn't. There might be a suspicion of 7 converts being killed, 7 Goyim being killed and converted. In order to avoid this, the Gemara says, let their better be torn out of the Torah, a mitzvah. Let one letter of the Torah be erased, rather than have a chil Hashem, that Goyim should say that Jews committed a crime against converts. Of course, the question is, what is that letter? There's a whole sentence there. Man shall die because of his sin. How do you say, tear out one letter in the Torah? The answer is that letter is a letter Vav. The pasuk says, Ish bechetei yumos. Each one shall die for his sin. Remove the Vav, chetei ish bechet yumos. A man shall die for a sin. Sometimes it's somebody else's sin. It's a question of Kiddush Hashem, Kiddush Shem Shemayim. A person could die for somebody else's sin, as we find depicted in this story itself. Now, the next question was, how about the fact that there is a mitzvah in Torah, very clearly stated, that even if you do kill someone, if someone dies through the act of the court, he is found guilty by the Sanhedrin, by the king, that he is sentenced to death, the sentence is carried out, and the person killed must be hung up on a tree for all others to learn a lesson from. See the penalty, see that the Torah believes in capital punishment, and let others learn a lesson they should avoid committing crimes to which there is death. But at the same time, the respect to the body, the person who is now dead, the sin has been forgiven. We do not allow a mitzvah in the Torah, do not allow this body to hang overnight. Or solid with lost their lights. You're not permitted to hang in the veil of his dead body on a tree overnight. Must be removed before nightfall. How come here we had these bodies, whether they died innocently or otherwise, they were put to death? Why did they hang for more than a day? Why overnight and why for 7 months? That's like a month for each one, averaging. Or every one of them hung for a total of 7 months. Again, the Gemara answers, because of the fact that let the Goyim pass by and see this Kiddush Hashem, that this is what these people died. Why? Because of the fact that they didn't hurt Jews, they hurt Goyim. Goyim were hurt, and this is the penalty they got for it. Imagine what a wonderful people these Jews are. What would happen then? They would admire the Jewish religion so much, they'd want to become part of it. The Gemara says that in that period of time, these bodies were hanging there, a total of 150,000 Goyim converted. That's how many were added to the Jewish ranks. This is what's known as the Kiddush Hashem, Kiddush Shemayim. Unified, sanctified the name of Hashem, and brought honor, respect to the Jewish religion by among all the nations. Now, in this case, though, the Gemara says, the moral lesson learned here is, fine, this had to be done. The plague stopped, the famine was over, the Gevonim were pacified, there was no more famine, and of course immediately afterwards King David made a special burial service for King Shaul with honor. This was all true. But the Gemara says, note the vicious heartlessness of these Givonim. Which person who has a heart, who has pity and kindness, would ever demand the life of an innocent person to satisfy his own whim? No matter what reason there is behind it, no matter what type of vendetta or vengeance he would seek, to ask for the life of an innocent person to satisfy a desire for revenge, this can be the quality, the characteristic only of one that does not come from the Kedusha of our ancestors, Aharon and Yaakov, the fathers of the Jews. So if we ever find a person who fails to possess kindness, pity, consideration, we know that he must come from a wrong line, a bad line. Ancestry must be one that is not pure. And a person should not attach himself, the Gemara says. Attach himself means find a mate, to marry, and then to give birth to children who have the same characters. Do not attach yourself to one who does not possess these qualities. This we learn from this story to avoid ones like these Gevonim and remain, see that your bond, your tie is with a Jew, one of Jewish extract, who has these fine qualities, this goodness, kindness, softness of nature. Now the Gemara says that after this incident, King David still did not find peace yet. Hashem spoke to King David and said to him, how long more do you have to have this hanging over your head, this crime of the city of Nov? Canaan killed, here you have 7 sons of 7 descendants of King Shaul killed, all due to the fact that you brought it about. Unintentionally, of course. You came to the city of Nov, you took the sword, you took the bread there, you had a part in it. And Hashem is so particular with tzadikim, the slightest act is punished to the highest degree. Hashem said to King David, I will give you a choice. One of two things. You must pay this penalty. Either that all your children will be wiped out, or else that you should fall into the hands of your enemy, be captured by your enemies. Which would you prefer? The King David said, I would much rather go to the hands of my enemies than to have my children wiped out, Chas v'sholom. I'd rather see that my descendants carry on after me. So Hashem issued a decree. Shortly afterwards, King David was out hunting, and he shot an arrow at an animal which kept on eluding him. He kept on moving until he found himself in the land of the Philistines. And when he came there, he came to the section, the land of the 4 giants. You recall that Orpah, the mother of Goliath giant, had four sons, all giants. And they sought revenge for their brother. Goliath was killed. These 4 villains wanted to avenge Goliath. First one was Yishbi. He was called Yishbi Benov. The posek says Yishbi Benov, meaning that he was Yishbi who came because of the story of Nov. Yishbi saw King David suddenly. He said, "That's the killer of Goliath." He quickly took hold of him and wanted to crush him with his bare hands, this giant. He pressed him down on the ground and bent a log over him and sat down on a log and just, with all his strength, crushed down. The Gemara says that a miracle happened and the earth beneath the log became very soft and King David was moved down into the earth. So he wasn't crushed. At that moment, the Gemara says that King David's second general in command, Avishai was the brother of Yoav, this general. Avishai was washing his face, and he suddenly saw drops of blood in the water. He looked up and he saw a dove tearing its feathers out. And he said, "That's a sign that the king's life must be in danger. Now, how will I be able to find the king? Where is he?" And he ran quickly to the Sanhedrin, to the chief rabbis, and asked them if he may ride the king's horse. It's, of course, a cardinal crime. But in the case of emergency, may he ride the king's horse? And they permitted it. Took the king's horse, and by its scent, it traveled to where King David was. And on the way, as he came to that city, he passed by Orpah, the mother, the original mother, that's the sister of Ruth, who had converted, who was the great-grandmother of King David. She was the mother of these giants. She was sitting on a road with a spinning wheel, weaving. And she saw Avishai coming. She said, "This is my chance to kill a Jew." She picked up the spinning wheel. She threw it with all her strength at him, but it wasn't enough to reach him. She was very old. She couldn't reach him. And she pretended as though it slipped out of her hands. She said to him, "Sonny, will you bring back that spinning wheel to me?" And he said, "Why, certainly." And he threw it at her with his strength. And he succeeded in killing, finally, this witch. Orpah was killed by Avishai. It's a very important historical fact. She was killed by Avishai. And this came in handy later on. Avishai continued on, and as he came close to Yishbi, the giant, Yishbi noticed him, and he felt that Avishai was the top general there among the Jews. He would better if he escaped. So he saw it from a distance. The Gemara says that he saw King David was alive. He lifted up King David and threw him high into the air. And then, straight line, he watched when he come down. He planted a spear in the ground and had King David fall directly on top, be impaled by the spear, killed in this fall. And then he started to flee, this giant. As Avishai came close, he saw what was happening. How do you save King David? First place, the Gemara says that the first miracle happened, a very important miracle, that Avishai had kefitzas haderech, which means the same miracle as happened to Yaakov Avinu happened to Avishai. When the earth came towards him, he traveled at unusual speed. The power of kefitzas haderech requires certain special heavenly powers. The power that Eliyahu had, Hashem HaKadosh stories about him who did this, traveled at the speed where the earth comes towards him rather than him going towards the earth. The earth is sort of shortened. When he came close, he saw King David falling. How to stop it? He said again a certain Shem, the name of Hashem, that through his power King David remains suspended in midair. But this sounds like Kabbalah stories. This is actually in the Gemara. It's a story that's actually written in the Gemara itself. The Gemara says King David was suspended in midair, that way he didn't fall on the spear. And while in midair, Abishai had a discussion with King David. He asked him, why did you come here? What happened? What brought this about? And King David replied, I did this because of the fact that I was given a choice. And I agreed to be handed over to fall into the hands of my enemies. This is what happened to me. Abishai said, retract your statement and ask that your children should be wiped out instead. What happens next? King David agreed because Abishai explained that there was no problem, no fear for his children. They had their own muzzle, and the question was that what happens now? So Abishai said to King David, now I'll say another Shem, then you'll come down to earth safely, then we will pursue Yishbi together. Abishai said to Shem, King David came down. David came down, and right after very great distance. They could not get them until Abishai called out to Yishbi, your mother is dead. Your mother was killed. This news so shocked and paralyzed Yishbi that he became weakened, and then King David and Abishai together were able to kill Yishbi, this giant. After this, King David came back safely, and the generals insisted that he never go out to battle again. They will take care of all wars henceforth. One final item the Gemara asks, surely King David was greater in the knowledge of Torah, knowledge of Kabbalah, the knowledge of these names of Hashem to perform miracles with. Why didn't he himself say this name of Hashem and suspend himself in midair? Why did he have to have Abishai to help him? You might ask that when a person is in trouble himself, he cannot help himself. He needs an outsider. The biggest tzadik, the strongest person, if he is in prison, the wisest person, cannot free himself. He's in prison with his hands tied up. But if he's outside, he could figure a plan to release those who are in prison. And therefore, it required someone on the outside who was free to be able to use this name of Hashem, this power to suspend King David in midair to save him. The Zohar Kodesh, the first Zohar Kodesh explained too, that according to the Gemara we can understand Yishbi's intentions, his act. Yishbi felt, back in his mind, of course he was a Russian, very wicked, but he felt that cold-blooded murder of King David might be punished someday, somewhere. So he decided that, knowing Hebrew law, that Groma bin Zokin, and if you cause, you're just the cause of harm, but not directly, then you're not to blame. You cannot be put to death for it. So he threw King David up in the air, enough that if he'd fall, he wouldn't be hurt much. At the time he threw up in the air, there was nothing wrong. He did no big crime. And he put a spear in the ground, spear in the ground. He said, I'm just putting a spear in the ground. But King David, it's not my fault if he happens to fall on this spear. These two acts combined could bring about the death of King David, but individually, nothing wrong with them. This he learned from the Mishnah, which says that person throws someone's dishes out of the window. At the bottom, there are pillows where the dishes would not be broken. Then he runs down, he gets there before the dishes do. He moves the pillow. He's one of those races. He moves the pillows, and the dishes are broken. He is free. There's no penalty unless it is done by two people. One does it, removes the pillows, neither one is guilty. This was the plan of Yishbi. Of course, this plan was an error. Any that Yishbi paid with his life. He was the first of the sons, the giants to die. Eventually, the other three were killed too, as we find later on in the ensuing story. As he said, King David was then requested by his generals to remain at home, not to go out to battle anymore. This he agreed to. We find the final chapter in the life of King David in the next year in the Teshuva. We should be zocher again to the true Amunah Tzadikim, and to see with our eyes the coming of Mashiach Ben David HaMelech. We have base a mixture of hating in it, Amen, Amen. We continue the Shir in Bavly. David HaMelech had been told, requested by his generals, that he no longer go to battle because his life was too precious, and there were enough soldiers to fight on his behalf. Also, in addition to the regular army of soldiers, there was a special class of Giborim. Giborim means very powerful, courageous fighters who are unusual in this talent. This is a special talent. A person possesses both courage and ability, this talent to do battle. King David had a number of specially talented fighters. There were three who were known as the Big Three, the Great Three. There were three top Giborim in his army. Above all was one known as Adino Ha'etzmi. He was so great that with one blow he could kill 800 soldiers of the enemy. There's a debate in the Gemara as to who he really was. Some say that he was one of King David's generals, top fighter that he possessed. Others say that this was King David himself. David himself had the special gifted powers from heaven, the blessing from heaven, that in battle he could kill 800 soldiers with one blow, and about which the Gemara adds that King David was very sad as to why he could not reach the number 1,000. Of course, to go still deeper, the question is brought, what is this great pride in destroying people, killing? Is there such great pride to be able to wipe out so many lives at one time? After all, these are soldiers, true that they are on the side of evil. They are attacking the Jews. They are attacking those who are holy, children of Hashem. It is a command by Hashem that they go out to battle to wipe them out. But being proud of doing it, we find that Hashem too is not happy with such a matter. The answer is that, in truth, Zohar Kodesh says, that Arizal says, that Rosenfeld goes into detail in this, that in every evil being there is a spark of good. This drop of good, this heavenliness in each being, is imprisoned in that being. To release that spark itself requires a very great tzadik. And this was the power of King David. He could take 800 of these Tomei individuals, to strike them down, to smite them down, simultaneously withdrawing from them all the nitzutzos, the sparks of kedusha, of holiness that were in them. This was his purpose in going out to battle, to withdraw the holy items, units that were imprisoned in these Tomei confines. Again, this first one, Adino Ha'etzmi, was listed as the most powerful fighter in King David's army, according to one opinion. Second to him was one called Elazar ben Feldo, who was so great that he would do battle, and he would strike with lightning speed. He would stand and fight until his hand became so tired out he could no longer lift it. That's how strong he was, and he would not stop. Every time he raised his hand with speed, he would strike at another person, another enemy soldier. Third was one called Shammah. This Shammah, too, was so great a fighter, a battler, that when the Jews went into battle against the Philistines, and they found themselves in trouble, when they fled this battle, the entire Jewish army would flee a battle. Shammah would stand alone and fight against the Philistines single-handedly and would win the battle. These were the three top fighters, top Giborim of King David's army. Afterwards, there were three others, great battlers, also Giborim. Second to these three, top one was Avishai, commander-in-chief. That was the brother of Yoav. Note that Yoav is not mentioned here. Yoav, the commander-in-chief of King David's army. About Yoav it is written that all these feats, these accomplishments, these Giborim were as nothing compared to Yoav's courageousness and physical prowess. This was what King David's army consisted of. Of course, it is understood that physical power means nothing. In the eyes of Hashem, physical strength is nothing. It is Hashem who decides and determines the outcome of any war. So if the Jews were obedient to the command of Hashem, they had the true religious spirit, Hashem was with them, they could win the war without these great heroes. It's just that Hashem showed them, He sent them such leaders as a symbol of the assistance of Hashem. Well, the Torah tells us that one time, before we go to that, there's one more of the great fighters mentioned with King David. And this one, the Gemara goes into much more detail explaining. His name was Benayahu ben Yehoyada. Benayahu, the posek says about him that he struck down the two Ariel. Ariel means the two kings of Moab. He struck them down. That's the simple translation. The Gemara also means that he was so great in the study of Torah that Ariel stands for the lions, which symbolize the Beis Hamikdash, the Holy Temple. There was nobody who could match his knowledge in Torah, both of the Holy Temples, both Beis Hamikdash, first and second. It says that, possibly about him, that he struck a lion in a ditch when it was snowing, a freezing cold day. He struck this lion down because it is known that a lion is much stronger in the winter than he is in the summertime. So in the snow, they all killed this lion. What is the reason for mentioning this physical accomplishment. The Gemara says this means that he himself was so strong, so filled with a unmatched fighting spirit for the sake of Hashem's commands, to battle against the Yetzer Hara, that when he came to the mitzvah of mikveh. Mikveh is one of the outstanding mitzvahs that we have, not just for women, but for men too. For men to purify themselves in the mikveh. On an ice-cold day, when the waters were frozen, Yaakov broke the ice. This day he struck the lion in the pit on a day of snow and ice, which means that he had the courage of a lion to break the ice on a freezing day and to dip in the mikveh in this icy waters. This is what Yaakov accomplished, and it is very important to know that what Yaakov did served as an example for later generations. Because this is not a feat that was done then, thousands of years ago only. Later generations, to the present day, in fact, many great tzaddikim, many high-spirited Jews who did and do the same. In Umar, it was known that the Arizal himself, of course, was forbidden to go out in the winter, break the ice, and dip. And many day came from Ulad, and they had to snow, who had done that. But I thought Arizal himself was accustomed to doing that regularly, breaking the ice and going to the mikveh in the icy waters. Arizal says, to go one step still further, just to touch on it, we won't go too deeply. We say the snow, the day of snow, the word sheleg, snow, it is known that in the old days, the great tzaddikim used to accept self-inflicted torture upon themselves to forgive for their sins. But we cannot take this into account for ourselves now. We are not fit to do such things. It is enough that we obey mitzvahs without accepting tortures, without taking upon ourselves suffering. As the Gemara says, that ordinary people are on a level where just do what Hashem wants of you. Don't add any additional restrictions. Don't take upon yourselves a disease, so you deprive yourself of drinking wine or other pleasures. Do what is permissible, and refrain from that which is forbidden, and you'll be serving Hashem properly. But in those days there were people who did, those days of course things in the past, recent past, tzaddikim who would bathe in snow and ice as a means of suffering to erase their sins. These tzaddikim were so great they didn't have sins that deserved this type of suffering. But as the Gemara says, the leading tzaddikim will take upon themselves a suffering that was so great to cover, to forgive the sins of the rest of the Jews. This is what's meant by a true devotion, a true leader of Jews. It's the tzadik emes, is one who leads the Jews with such devotion that he's willing to suffer for their sake. Just as Mashiach himself, the Gemara says, is suffering for so many generations now to forgive for the sins of the Jews, so that the Jews should be worthy of his name. This sheleg contains the word shegel, which means a sin that is fit for a dog, a very low type of sin, and that is a kiruv. In fact, the word for kiruv, targum, is shegel. So that Yaakov took upon himself this tikkun of this by going into this sheleg, tikkun for chil of this, which stands for killer, for dog. This is why the Yaakov there's a lot of ben yud kei vav. Ben, which stands for both. Ben is ze'er. The bed also is shed bon, which is the letter F, Yud K Vav. Bed is the letter K, F, Yud K Vav, the final letter. This letter K is the shed bon, which is the gematria Kelev, which stands for a shed bon. Not the Behemah, other than Behemah, it's the Evanukla. All this is included in B'nayahu, about which the Arizal says that we find that he was a tikkun for many others in the past. The Arizal says, though, it is better not to reveal his Gilgulim, so we will abide by the Arizal's wishes there. Suffice it to say that the Yoda was so great, so holy, that, as the Gemara says, there were very few to ever match his greatness in either Beis HaMikdash. Now, the Torah tells us an example of the powers of King David's followers. One day, during the time of battle, King David did not take part in this battle as he had been requested to, and he suddenly said, "I have an urge. I would like to drink the special waters that are found in a well in the land of the Philistines." He had tasted those waters once. He recalled that the water, how clear and sparkling this water was, and he said, "I wish I could have some of that water." He just mentioned this wish. 3 of his Gibborim, Avishai, the brother of Yoav, and the other 2, this was the second one Gibborim, not the first he mentioned. These 3 took their swords and slashed a path through the enemy lines. 3 of them faced the entire enemy lines, cut a path through, went to this well, took the water from there, and had a fat on the way back, and brought the water to King David and said, "Here, we brought you the water you wish to drink." King David was so emotionally touched by this act on their part that he said, "The waters which were brought at the risk of your lives, I could never allow myself to drink. I consider these waters holy. Therefore, I shall pour this water out before Hashem. I offer this water to Hashem. I will not drink it." This is a simple translation. The Gemara says that there's a deeper interpretation of this story. The interpretation, we say that King David desired to drink water. We always use the word water as a symbol of Torah, which means he desired to find out a special halacha, a din, the Hebrew law. So how can he find it out? The Sanhedrin, who were in session, but it was difficult to get to them. He wanted to have 3 Gibborim at the time to battle their way through this battle lines, reached the Sanhedrin and asked them this question. The question was an item which is discussed in Gemara, or Chlokas, which you have used in Rabbanan. The question was Talmud Bavly, which means that if someone damages the property of a private property owner, for example, as a storage or warehouse filled with wheat, if he sets fire to that wheat, of course he must pay for the value of the wheat. But what if in that wheat there are hidden special utensils, expensive small items hidden in those bushels of wheat? Is he responsible to pay for that which is hidden? This question he sent to the Sanhedrin, resolved, and these 3 Gibborim went there, brought back the answer. The answer was that it is forbidden, that wasn't the question yet. The main part of the question was not whether he has to pay for it, but whether if it is done in a time of war. In other words, his army is advancing, and in order to advance, to get to the enemy, or to protect themselves, they must set fire to the property of a Jew. But this property has hidden in it these expensive items. Now, can he do this, set fire to the property, and must he pay for these items that were hidden there? The answer was, they said, of course, there's a question of whether he must pay for what's hidden inside. However, since you are a king, you have a right, a legal right, to go through anywhere, break into anyone's property, use that property for your purposes, and you are exempt from any type of payment. King David accepted his statement, but said that since these three were compelled to risk their lives, to go through enemy lines to get this answer, he would not quote the din in their name. Though it is a mitzvah to always quote the source, the origin of a halacha of a din, in this case he omitted their names because of the fact that they risked their lives to get it, which was not worth it. It was not worth risking their life to get the answer to this question. In addition, the Yerushalmi says that the problem here was he asked for water, not to drink himself. Water was because this was Sukkot time. In Sukkot we have the Nisach HaMayim, pouring water under the Mizbeach, and that is why he said, the waters you brought, I will pour out before Hashem. Before Hashem means under the Mizbeach. This is an example of the prowess, the courage of the fighters in King David's army. These are the ones who led the Jews in battle for him. At all times they were extremely successful. Now we come to a special incident that took place. This, in fact, is the final incident of this Sefer of Navi, Shmuel based. Torah tells us that towards the King David's life, Hashem became angered at the Jews. In other words, the time had come for the Jews to pay for a certain sin. Sin was that during the life of King David, when they should have been loyal to King David throughout, to David HaMelech throughout, loyal to him as a king, loyal to him as a tzadik, loyal to him as a Rebbe, as a leader, spiritually and physically. Instead, they turned away from him so many times, following those who rebelled against him. So there was a decision in heaven to bring a plague, to bring a suffering, a harsh decree upon the Jews. How to get that done legally? So we find, for example, Baal Shem HaKadosh says, the last posek, last psukim of a mizmor we say for Shabbos, last word we say of Hashem is just and does nothing wrong. That below Avlosa Bo, there is no wrong done by Hashem. Hashem is righteous and there is no wrong done by Hashem. So Baal Shem HaKadosh gave as a mushal case where an earthly king who has a criminal brought before him. The criminal has committed a crime that deserves a death penalty. And the king is justified in sentencing this criminal to death. There's no question about it that he is doing something which is yosher, which is righteous. At the same time, there is a wrong resulting from this. Because though it may be true that this criminal has committed a crime for which he deserves to die, his wife committed no sin or crime which should make her convert her into a widow. Or his children are innocent. Why should they suffer as orphans? or his partners in business? Why should they suffer the loss that his death will incur? So the king is doing what is right in killing him, but he cannot help himself having others suffer as a result. When Hashem punishes a person, if there are any side effects, it is only because those who are being affected deserve that type of punishment exactly. Hashem will not kill a person until the time has come for his wife to deserve becoming a widow, for his children to become orphans, and for everyone else who will suffer thereby to be party of this suffering. So here too, Hashem brought this about through an act of David HaMelech himself. The Satan, the Zohar, Malach HaModas, the same angel, got into King David and talked him into committing an act that was legally forbidden. One of the mitzvahs in the Torah is that you are not allowed to count Jews. It is forbidden to count them. This is why when it comes to a million, we cannot count to see if there are 10. We use a special formula by saying a certain posek, or in the Beis HaMikdash they had to raise a finger, they had to remove a yarmulke to begin with. There were special means in which the Jews were counted, but you cannot count them directly. Here, suddenly, King David was filled with a desire to find out the population of the Jews and take a census. And so he summoned Yaakov and said to him, I want you to go out and count the Jews. Yaakov was shocked. He said, what's the difference? As many as there are, may they multiply. King David insisted, told him to go out and count the Jews. I must have the number. It's as though the Spirit entered into him and forced his actions. And then, when this was done, King David suddenly felt a pang of conscience, a pang of deep regret and remorse. And then, suddenly, the prophet God came to King David and said, I have a message for you from Hashem. The message is that you are counting the Jews may not be counted, because if they are counted, then harm will befall them. But since they've been counted, something tragic must take place. But you will be the one to decide what that tragedy will be. You have a choice of 3 items. Hashem gives you this choice. Either the Jews shall suffer 7 years of famine, or they will suffer 3 months of constant, steady defeat at the hands of their enemies, or 3 days of a deadly plague from heaven. You must choose one of these 3. King David thought about this, and he decided. The author says that what prompted his decision was, first he thought, if I would select 7 years of hunger, then they would suspect me, the Jews would suspect me of picking something where I would not be affected by it. They'd say, I'm wealthy, I have enough food to live on. So I'm excluding myself from this punishment. If I would select 3 months of battle, war, defeat at the hands of the enemies, again they suspect me of being able to sit back at home and to be safe from the enemy. Therefore, if I select a plague, I am as much at the mercy of the angel of death as anyone else, because he does not discern between wealthy, poor, high society, or the lowest type of peasant. The angel of death strikes, he strikes at will. So he said, for the sake of the people's minds, to set them at ease, I will select the plague. However, he said to the prophet, good, the only devil no good, nip lo no biyad Hashem, ki rabbi v'rachamo, v'yad odom alapelo. Said to the prophet God, if we have to fall into one's hands, let us better fall into the hands of Hashem, rather than the hands of our enemies, because Hashem is filled with pity with compassion, with kindness, with consideration. We'd rather be at the mercy of Hashem for 3 days than the mercy of our enemies. The enemy is given the green light, the go-ahead signal. He can be so sadistic, so vicious, as to have no pity on the Jews and perhaps wipe them out. Whereas we find, in the case of Hashem, Kaviyachol, the Gemara tells us an interesting point. Hashem is all-powerful, and Hashem has his instruments of death, instruments of destruction. These are called the arrows of destruction. And Hashem says in the chapter where he speaks about a warning, a threat to Jews, if you will disobey me, if you will reject my mitzvahs, Hashem says, then I will send after you, I will strike you with my arrows. And all the arrows I have, I will spare none of them. I will shoot every last arrow I have into you. These are the arrows that Hashem has. These are heavenly forces with which he will strike at the Jews. So this is so awesome and so frightening that it appears as though there is no chance for survival. Hashem will send even one arrow to destroy a nation, to destroy a world, to destroy a universe. Here Hashem says, I'm going to use every single one of my arrows. And the very last one, Chitzai Achala Bom, the posek says. Every one of my arrows I will shoot till I finish every last arrow which will strike into the Jews. You want to say that's a very kind statement by Hashem. Because Chitzai Kolon, this means. I'll use up all my arrows. Why? You don't shoot arrows at nothing. You've got to shoot at something, which means the Gemara says that the Jews will outlast all the arrows of Hashem. The arrows will come to an end, but the Jews will not. They will outlast the top degree of punishment sent by Hashem. This is a haftacha, an assurance by Hashem, that my people will never be wiped out. My arrows could consist of a united effort by United Nations to attack a small band, a small group, a small nation, a tiny country of Israel. We can have the concerted effort of all these evil nations, all with set one goal, to obliterate, to erase the last vestige of this tiny country. But they will not succeed, because throughout history, the empires, the greatest world empires, have tried that, and they themselves have gone down to defeat. There is no trace left of them on these same arrows that Hashem sent, because it is impossible to erase the Jews as a nation, the Jews as a people. Just as Hashem is infinite, eternal, everlasting, so too are the Jews. And with this promise by Hashem, therefore, David and all said, let us fall into the hands of Hashem, because Hashem, even when he punishes, is so kind and so considerate that surely he will see to it that less of the Jews will suffer in the 3 days of plague than by the hands of the enemies for 3 months. So the Torah says that this plague began. And the plague began with the other cities in Eretz Yisrael. It went very quickly. The angel of death cut a swath, constant flow of blood to the Jews. It reached a total of 70,000 dead. First day. And they could see the path the angel of death took. As they could see for each Jew fell dead in that order. He had reached the gates of Yerushalmi. At that point, King David broke out in a bitter cry. He cried to Hashem and said, why should these innocent lambs suffer? It is my fault. I am the one that is guilty. I should be the one to suffer. Why should so many Jews pay with their lives for me? This was the cry of King David, the tefillah, a life that was filled with so much suffering. Not the life of King David. He was constantly being harassed, pursued by enemies. He never had a moment of respite, a moment of real true peace, far from constant bitterness. But yet this life was what made us rich, because due to his trials, due to his sufferings, he composed the Sefer Tehillim. Sefer Tehillim is 150 chapters where he pours out his heart to these words with such deep emotion, such deep kavod, so much feeling. Any kind of person, any Jew who's ever in any kind of trouble or suffering, he only take the Sefer Tehillim and read these chapters of Tehillim, and he can find himself, his own experience in these chapters of Tehillim. Every type of suffering, every type of anguish or agony that a person can experience is found in the words of David HaMelech in Tehillim. Any type of his bitterness that a person needs, he can use a Sefer Tehillim for it. The fact that it's so all-encompassing that the most important 10 chapters that exist are from the Sefer Tehillim. It encompasses all the 10 types of Megillah. As Rabbi Nachman says, the 10 chapters of Tehillim, the 10 forms of Megillah, which can cure the 10 poisonous arrows that were shot into the princess or the cause of the gullus of the Shekhinah. This is the Sefer that King David composed, Sefer Tehillim. And how did he compose this Sefer Tehillim? Whenever he was in trouble, he had King Shaul pursuing him, when he had Avshalom seeking his life, he had the other enemies who were out to kill him, when he had his battles with the Philistines, the rest of the Goyim, he would always turn to Hashem, pour out his heart and tefillah to Hashem, and he would compose these words of it. Together, of course, the Gemara says, with 9 other great tzaddikim. Some of the chapters deal with composing others tzaddikim too. But basically, it is by King David, and this Sefer Tehillim we now have is a chus of Sefer Tehillim, which is the key to Teshuva. Interesting to note how close Teshuva is related with Tehillim. Arizal shows that the first posek in Shmos, Ela Shmos Bnei Yisrael Aboy Mitzrayim Es Yaakov Ish Uveisei Bo. That's the first posek. And the Sefer Tehillim, the last letters of those words, constitute the 2 words Teshuva and Tehillim, which show the relation between the two, which also makes up the Bnei Yisrael, the wholesomeness, the purity of the Jews. It's dependent upon Teshuva and only the saying of Tehillim. So, in this case, David HaMelech cried to Hashem for the salvage of the lives of the rest of the Jews, save them from this plague. And again, Hashem sent the prophet Navi God to King David and told him that he should offer a special korban, a sacrifice, in the yard of R Avraham Steinhartz. R Avraham Steinhartz was the king of the Yerusalem who converted. He lived there in Yerushalmi. He lived there in a special place. This yard he possessed was actually the Menachem Mendel Schneerson. So King David was notified, now this is the place to offer a korban, because this is the place where in the future Jews will offer korbanos, but they'll have the Beis HaMikdash. It would be advisable to buy this spot, to own it, and to start preparations for the building of Beis HaMikdash. Since King David was told he could not build the Beis HaMikdash, at least he could build the foundation for it. So he set about to purchase this area from Arizal. He approached R Nosson said, if you want to offer a korban to Hashem, there's no question about it. A privilege like that, I give you my property free. I want no money for it. The King David said, I've learned an important lesson from our forefather Avraham Avinu. He approached Ephraim to buy the cave of 4 couples in Aharon. He paid a high price for it for a very important reason. The Zohar Kodesh says that anything, any mitzvah for which you pay money is worth much more than a mitzvah which comes free. And that's why you find many halachas in that respect. When it comes to getting an aliyah on Yom Tov, especially Rosh Hashanah and Kippur, the din says, be sure to bid. We have these the offers of the aliyahs at a price. Be sure to bid as high as you possibly can for these achus, buying an aliyah. Arizal especially speaks about that, stresses that point, about the value of bidding for these aliyahs, and how much more valuable an aliyah is, any aliyah, bought for money, than the so-called special aliyahs which come free. The same thing too with every type of mitzvah. The Gemara says in general, something that costs nothing is worth nothing. For example, Asya the Bhagavad, the Gemara says a doctor who cures for nothing is worth nothing. It's absurd. A doctor who cures for something is also worth nothing. In general. But where someone gives you something that may be beneficial, if he charges nothing for it, then you should be certain that there is very little value attached to it. Especially if it is something spiritual, then you should see to it to show your ahava for the mitzvah by giving of your money for it. As a symbol, the Blessed says, the first Mishnah Kedusha. We speak always about Yiras Hashem, symbolized by the word Isha. Isha Yiras Hashem, Hitas Hawa. Here Hashem, mitzvahs, symbolized by the mikvah, Isha. That's why Rabbi Nachman says if you ever want to learn about true Amudah, true simple faith, you'll find that much more in women than you'll find it in men. Because women have that simple sincerity. Therefore, women are the symbol of Yiras Hashem and mitzvahs. So too, the Mishnah says in Kedushin, the first words, Isha Niknas Bekesef. A woman can be acquired at a wedding as a wife with money. The Rosenfeld says this means Isha Yiras Hashem, a woman, meaning the mitzvahs. Yiras Hashem can be acquired solidly, perfectly, much more strongly if he pays money for it. Isha Niknas, Yiras Hashem mitzvahs should be bought. The kesef, pay money for it, then you have really acquired it. This is what King David did. He bought this place of Aramna, brought up the sacrifice, and after the end of the first day, the plague ended. The Aharon says it ended because one person passed away who was equal to a large portion of the Jewish people. That was Abishai, the brother of Yaakov. After his passing, the plague ceased, and King David brought this korban, the sacrifice, and upon which later we said he built the foundation of the Beis HaMikdash. We should be zacher, the emes, to see with our eyes the rebuilding of the Beis HaMikdash, the coming of Mashiach, and Hayden Yameinu, Amen, Amen.